Hey there, gang. Patrick King here, and I want to thank you for tuning in for episode number 35 of Talking About Horses. Today, I am pleased to be joined by Dr. Paul Haefner. Dr. Haefner is a licensed clinical psychologist with more than 25 years of professional experience. In addition to his PhD in clinical psychology, Dr. Haefner is a certified clinical hypnotherapist and a certified master practitioner of neuro-linguistic programming. In his practice, he provides sports psychology consultation, equine facilitated personal and professional development, and a broad range of other therapeutic services to adults, adolescents, and children. He supported the development of research on the horse-human relationships through his role as research committee chair for the Equine Assisted Growth and Learning Association, and currently serves as a member of the board of directors for the Horses and Humans Research Foundation. An avid equestrian since his childhood, Dr. Haefner has combined his love for horses and lifelong equestrian experience with his knowledge of human psychology in order to help people raise their level of performance and overcome many of the challenges that arise when participating in equestrian sport. Through Riding Far LLC, Dr. Haefner helps equestrians address issues such as performance pressure, fear, anxiety, motivation, goal setting, focus, concentration, and more. In addition to his work with individuals, Dr. Haefner presents seminars and clinics customized to the needs of specific groups of riders from a wide range of equestrian disciplines. Dr. Haefner, I'll call you Paul, thank you so much for joining us on Talking About Horses.
I'm really pleased to be here, Patrick. Thank you for the invitation.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. I think this is going to be great. So give us a little bit of backstory. Who is Paul Hefner? How did you get involved? Let's talk first about horses. How did you get involved with horses?
It was something I was born with. I didn't come from a horsey family so much. I had a great uncle that rode until he was in his late 70s. But he was the only one in the extended family who rode. But when I was 5, I remember, this is the story that's told. I don't know if it's true or not. But my mother says when I was 5, I came to her and said, I want to ride. And she said, when you were 10. And then apparently I didn't say anything about it until my 10th birthday. And on the morning of my 10th birthday, I woke up and said, can I ride now? So it's something that I've always loved, something that I've always been interested in. And, counting the years, we're now going on 46 years in. So it's always been something that I loved. It's just kind of like loving ice cream.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And I love how you said that you were born with it. I think that's kind of how it works for all of us, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, that's one of the things, and actually I spent a lot of time with people talking about that because, that really speaks to issues about motivation. What is this about and why am I doing this stuff? And, the great thing about it is that if you understand the different pieces of it, and for me, for example, I have a number of different things that I love. One is just being in and around horses. So, for example, in the years that my kids were young and I was working a lot and didn't have as much time to ride, I was lucky enough to be able to purchase a small farm and take care of my horses. And that just being around them and taking care of them every day was something that fed that part of me. Right?
Yeah.
And now that I have a little bit more time, I'm also love to learn and I love to ride, I love to jump, and about my growing passion for classical dressage. So now that I have the time and energy to let those other things, to be able to do some of the other things that I really love and I'm excited about that have to do with horses as well.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And just a heads up for anybody listening too, Paul and I have known each other for a number of years now. So if the conversation turns friendly and less professional, as many of these conversations tend to do, which I think our audience really enjoys anyway, that's kind of where that's coming from. We've ridden together and visited quite a bit over the last few years. So yeah, which is totally fine with me if we get super friendly.
The other piece of your question is how the psychology piece connected to it.
Yes.
And, for me, I had a choice point going to college, and I was actually asked to go ride with a Hungarian fellow named Captain Saunders, and chose to go to college instead. And college sort of led me down the road to psychology, and then when I was in graduate school, I actually started writing regularly again. So I had set things aside for a while. And as I got out of graduate school, I realized that here I spent all this time and invested in this training to do this thing of, psychotherapy work. And I started at that point trying to find different ways of taking my training in psychology and putting it together with the horses. And that had taken several forms over the years, but my first thought about it was to do this work with sports psychology, and my second thought about it was to incorporate the horses in the psychotherapy work I was doing. So I had a practice where I did equine assisted psychotherapy for years and years and years as well.
Gotcha. So now, let's go through a little bit of this. What is the psychotherapy, and how does that different from any other type of therapy?
The equine-assisted psychotherapy, it takes, as with any other type of psychotherapy, takes a lot of different forms, and different people do it in different ways. The unifying ingredient is that it is done with horses. And many of the people who are doing that kind of work use their relationship and interactions with the horse as metaphors for other things that are going on in a client's life. So it's pretty typical for someone to come in and after some orientation in terms of basic safety and talking about things of that sort, that there is an activity that's set up with horses. Now, it might be something as simple like with some of my super anxious kids. I used to have a little Palomino pony, Pina Colada pony, and we used to do activities like grooming. And that was about all that they could do, was to screw up the courage to come close to the pony, and brush the pony and that sort of stuff. And then there are other activities that you can do with horses, and that, like, for example, another common activity would be if someone's feeling challenged by something in particular, you might work at liberty in a round pen and set up a small obstacle in the middle of the round pen, and then task the individual with encouraging their horse to go over the obstacle, and the obstacle then is metaphorically the obstacle that they're facing. So it gives them a chance as they're trying to work through that with the horse. And they have rules like you can't hit the horse, and you can't touch the horse, and you can't bribe the horse. So it becomes a little bit more challenging in that context. And then people reflect on their experience. And one of the things that almost always happens is people get connected to resources that they didn't realize or knew that they had. They understand their challenges in a different way. It just gets people out of their head, right? And it helps them to think about the way they're tackling challenges in their life in a different way.
So that's then more specifically about how that becomes kind of the metaphor or the analogy for their life or the experience that they're going through.
Exactly. And then, what I have done more and more of over time is just have people spend time with their horses at liberty. Without doing less and less of actually kind of engineering the activity and helping people discover, what kind of stimulus value they have for horses, or maybe perhaps the horse in their life, and what kind of relationship have they really developed. The old saying that, the truth, it happens when the halter comes off, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And that people can learn a lot about themselves and how they engage in relationships in general. And as we all know, everything that we're doing with the horses are relationship based, whether we think of it that way or not. So.
Interesting. Okay, and then let's see. Going back to your bio, the clinical hypnotherapist. That's pretty interesting. How does that work? Let's talk about that.
So when I first started into the sports psychology world, I had been trained as a psychotherapist and as more of an insight, what they would call an insight-oriented psychotherapist. So the idea was that you would come in and sort of the more classic and representation of therapy, and you go and you talk, and you go in every week for how many months or years you're going to do that. And I realized at the time that I wanted to have some tools that I could use with people to make effective and quicker changes. And I had the good luck of getting connected with a man named Ron Klein, who runs, I think he's still at it, training people in hypnotherapy and neuro-linguistic programming. There's a lot of overlap between those two things conceptually. Mm-hmm. So, and pursued that training is something that I could bring to riders and to use to help them. The hypnotherapy stuff is really cool in the sense that it really helps people make pretty quick changes when the conditions are right. And it's very similar in many ways to the neuro-linguistic programming work. And in fact, the neuro-linguistic programming was actually developed to model a hypnotherapist named Erickson. So it's a different tradition. It was developed outside of psychology, but carries many of the same hallmarks. But this is part of it is when I talk a lot with people about, or I've been talking about a lot recently about how people they have something that's really troubling them, and they understand if they're training their horse that it might take years to sort something out or to develop what they're looking for in their training. But when it comes to a problem that they have for themselves, most of us really kind of expect it to get resolved really quickly. Right. Someone says the magic word, and even if logically we know that's not going to happen that way. Right. But that's the cool stuff about the hypnosis work is that when the conditions are right, we can talk about the 5 essential conditions for change if you want to. There's a whole other tangent. Oh my goodness. But when the conditions are right, then people can make changes really, really quickly. So, and I've seen people who have, my own clients when I started working with this stuff, there are things that they had brought for therapy. I worked with them for years and never been able to resolve like 1 or 2 of these things. And, we got the hypnotherapy working, and in 45 minutes they made significant changes. Yeah, so it does represent kind of the magic of what I can do. Gotcha. Yeah.
And so, excuse my ignorance. When we talk hypnotherapy, like I'm getting the picture of the old cartoon, somebody waving a clock back and forth in front of you, and I kind of go back to the old cartoon of the Jungle Book, right? And the snake hypnotizes Mowgli and his eyes swirl and all that fun stuff. Yes, I'm really just an 8-year-old boy. I will admit it, because we're starting to talk about therapy and my mind goes to cartoons. But so how does the hypnotherapy work?
Well, so there's a couple things that are helpful to know about it. The first thing is hypnosis. To be hypnotized really is about entering into an altered state of consciousness. Okay, now that's really big words, and we think like, whoa, but the reality is we experience altered states of consciousness all the time. So
right, I've got a glass of wine in front of me right now.
There you go. Well, you would know because you drive a lot, right?
Yes, right.
Yeah, and I'm sure every once in a while you're driving along, all of a sudden you're at your exit. It's like, oh crap!
Yes.
I got to get off here. And where did the time go?
Right, 100 miles disappeared, and where the hell did it go?
Right. So during that period of time, you were in a trance state. Okay, you were in an altered state of consciousness in which time was shortened. Okay, so the only difference between being hypnotized in a hypnotic trance and states like that, or daydreaming in school, or that time in the morning, when you're waking up and you're not quite sure whether you're awake or asleep, those sorts of things, is that in hypnosis, we enter that state on purpose, right? You have someone who's skilled, who's guiding you into that state on purpose. Right? So that's one thing that's helpful to know. The second thing that's helpful to know is I often describe it to people as the most extraordinary, ordinary experience you'll ever have.
I like that. That's really cool. I like that thought.
Yeah, it's really, once people experience it, and the awkwardness of this, they get beyond the awkwardness of the structure, of being guided into a trance, and that it's, for the vast majority of people, it's a very familiar space and a very pleasant space, for them to be in. For me, there are a million different ways to help people to get into that trance state, to guide them into that trance state. And a lot of people, their familiarity with hypnosis is through stage hypnotists, or the old movies, or the cartoons. And you certainly can be as sophisticated as you wish to be in how you help people do that. The work that I do is I often try to use the simplest methods that I can to help them to enter into a trance state. So when I induce a trance, it's often, I use a lot of language and a lot of structures that are similar to what people experience when they're starting a meditation.
Okay.
Yeah, so if you go to Headspace and and you listen to the guy and he's sort of helping you get comfortable and that sort of stuff, there are patterns of what he's doing that's part of my trance induction program. So it's very straightforward. It's not particularly mystical. It's easy to understand, and when people allow themselves to go through it, it's something that's really familiar, and that's really, really helpful, that you don't have to spend a lot of time getting used to something. So, and then the final thing that I would say about it, which is the interesting thing to me, is that, a hypnotic trance in and of itself doesn't really do anything.
Okay.
So, unless you're having a hard time relaxing, right? So that's really what it does. The whole point of it, though, is and the theory behind it is that in that state, you have greater access to your internal resources and experiences. So in your conscious state, you're sort of locking down the ship, right? You want to let certain things into your consciousness, and it's what you're focused on. You don't remember a lot of things that you know, that kind of stuff. And what happens with the trance state is it gives you greater access to those internal resources. And then when you're doing that work with them, the work that you do in a hypnotic trance then is more effective. It sort of potentiates it or catalyzes the work that you're doing with people.
Gotcha. So that does sound very similar, at least in my knowledge and understanding of it, to sort of the meditative state.
Absolutely. I think that when, people who do meditate regularly, I would count, those meditative states as, one of those altered states. of consciousness that is the same or similar to a hypnotic trance. And again, the whole difference is that we're doing it on purpose, and we have a structure and a plan in terms of what we're going to do once we get you there.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
So, and this is just kind of coming to mind here, when we see somebody working, an athlete or a musician or somebody, they kind of get in the zone, right? We talk about that zone. Is that kind of maybe similar to what you're trying to access by going into that hypnotic trance state?
So if someone, let's say I'm working with a rider, an upper level athlete or any athlete who is looking to achieve a particular kind of performance state, right? So they sort of have it in their sights in terms of how they want to feel and what they want that state to be, and you can call it a flow state or in the zone or those sorts of things. So the hypnotic state isn't in and of itself going to be isn't an equivalent of the zone of being in the zone.
Okay.
But what we can do in the hypnotic state is we can help people to fine-tune or connect to that experience of being in the zone, whatever that means to them. And that's a whole other thing that we could talk about. One of the things to appreciate is that ideal performance states are not the same for everybody.
Sure.
And we sometimes fall into the trap. When we think about, we do need to have people we look up to and people we idolize and people that help motivate us in that way. But if we try to be too much like someone who is, profoundly different than us, then I would argue that there are, some elite athletes that are just, they're just neurologically different than the vast majority of people. They don't process the world in the same way, which is where those, nerves of steel and focus come from.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's easier for them to close other things out. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, or stay focused, or they don't get distracted because they don't have those same feeling states. They have ice in their veins, and it's not because they used to be a mess and now they're not, right? Because they worked through it. No, they've always had ice in their veins. It's just kind of the way they experience the world.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So getting back to your question, this idea, what's the hypnosis and how does it relate to something like the zone? So let's say, you have a competition, you're competing, and you want to be in a certain performance state when you enter the arena, right? Mm-hmm. So what we could do in hypnosis is we could help you identify and bolster and refine and strengthen your experience and understanding of what that state is, so you can really feel it. And not only can you feel it and know it, but I can help you be able to make it, the language I would use is to say make it portable, so that you could access it whenever you needed to and wanted to. Mm-hmm. So that's one thing that we could do with the hypnosis. The other then is all the things that people talk about, the value of things like visualization. I really prefer, talking about it more in terms of imagination and imagery. And the reason for that is that I think sometimes when people, think about visualization, they only think about seeing something. And when you're using visualization, it's really about experiencing it in its full, in a full way, and experiencing all the sensory channels, as you're practicing something. So one of the things that you can do in hypnosis is that you can practice engaging in competition at a high level in this ideal feeling state that you have, or state of mind that you have, the zone or the flow state. And because you are in that, because you are in that altered state of consciousness, you have greater access to all the resources that you're pulling together to create that state for you, and there's less distractions.
Gotcha.
So you get to kind of groove it, not just in terms of your experience and being able to kind of know that you can do it and have it in your memory, but the other really interesting thing about using your imagination is your mind is not particularly good, quite honestly, at distinguishing reality from fantasy.
Sure.
So,
Sure.
so the really cool thing about this is that as you are in the sort of mental rehearsal in these hypnotic states, is that you are actually grooving the neural patterns and muscular firing patterns that go along with whatever it is that you're doing. So you're actually physically and neurologically rehearsing and preparing, and that's really important because that piece of it is something, psychologically, the phrase they use is neurons that fire together, wire together, and neural paths that are used more frequently. Neurologically, they develop a heavier coating around them of myelin.
Okay.
And when they do that, then electrical signals travel over them more efficiently. And so what you're doing in this kind of rehearsal is you're actually strengthening and making those pathways more efficient. And the more efficient they become, the easier they are to access. And the more experience you have experiencing that kind of zone state, the easier it's going to be for you to bring it up when you are in the sort of competition mode and in the heat of competition.
Gotcha. Okay. So that's a little more like the biological science that goes into that, right? With the idea of the formation of the myelonic sheath and things like that.
Mm-hmm. That's one of the most exciting things about about the work that I do now is that the neurobiology is really not just catching up and informing the work that I do, but we're seeing a lot of research which is supporting things that we thought were really, really helpful. So, that stuff is really, really cool. And it's a big part of, sports psychology now.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And we have one of our listeners, Anne Marie, who just typed in kind of the question about, is this similar to what we would refer to as muscle memory?
Yes, and that's another, so those neural channels that trigger muscles,
mm-hmm.
That all of that stuff gets fired and gets cemented as well. So you're working on muscle memory and you're working on making more efficient neural pathways and all that sort of stuff all at the same time.
Right. Fantastic. Because the muscles, of course, themselves don't have memory, right? It's the brain that links with the movement and things like that.
Right. It's the pathway. It's the pathways and combinations. So both in terms of combinations in parallel and combinations in sequence. And when you develop expertise in a skill, you're honing that muscle memory both, so I always talk about how this works in a bad way.
Okay.
So I know, for example, that if I have, if I want to engage my horse and I want to, have a bend to the right, and as soon as there's a brace, and if I feel the brace, and you know this from running me, then everything else in my body braces. So I have this, and some of that is just about what humans do. They engage in conflict and everything kind of works together. That's like people going into a fetal position when they get scared. But, I have these really unfortunate mutual firings. and they do it automatically. And I'm sure in many other situations, like as a kid when I was playing football or something like that, it was, you know, it was a really helpful thing. But you know, a lot of times, not only do we, when we're learning particular skills, are we practicing, you know, certain kinds of muscle memory, as the listener was saying. And then the other cool thing about this stuff is you can use it to help you separate the things that you automatically connect together. Right?
Interesting. So you mentioned two phrases that I've heard but never, so far, at least to my memory anyway, have gotten clarification on. Combinations in parallel and combinations in sequence. So when you talk about the horse bracing and then you brace as a result, is that what we would talk about as combinations in sequence?
So you know, if I put my left leg down, my right leg automatically goes out. That would be because they're used to happening in parallel at the same time. So I need to break those apart. A sequence is, let's say, you know, music.
Okay.
So if I'm playing the piano and I learn a song, I'm playing you know, the Maple Leaf Rag or something, and you know, you hit one or two notes and then you automatically know what the third note is, right? Your hand just kind of moves, flows in that sequence. So you learn a sequence of moves, and you can perseverate in that way, and that impacts our riding as well, in ways that, you know, a lot of times are less than conscious, because a lot of times we don't pay attention to the way that our muscles fire in our body, right? We just, things just kind of happen.
Gotcha.
But yeah. So if you've learned to do something in a particular way when you were young and you've done it for 20 years, then you start the sequence and your body will finish the sequence, right?
Okay.
Or if you learned something in a particular way, or there's certain instinctual things like, you know, under stress, there's certain kinds of tension in your body and everything kind of happens all at once, right? And in riding, that's a real challenge because, you know, everybody wants to have an independent seat and want to be able to apply their leg aids independently and have independent hands and, you know, all of these different things. And that's a real challenge for the vast majority of us.
Yes. Very interesting. Okay, so going back to the hypnotherapy, you were talking about getting to state and making it portable. And that brings to mind, I've read a little bit, I've listened quite a bit to this idea of the neuro-linguistic programming, or NLP. And you're a certified master practitioner of NLP, right? So now for our listeners that aren't aware of what that is and how it works, can you give us kind of like the distilled version of what that is?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, that there were a couple of men back, I'm going to say 40, 50 years ago now, I can't remember exactly when, were studying people who had mastered whatever it was that they were doing. And one of the masters that they studied was a guy named Derek Erickson, who was a hypnotherapist, really well-known and well-respected hypnotherapist that seemed to be able to do this magic with people. And what they came up with was basically a map of how people, or their thoughts and ideas about how people create their experience, from sensory input to the internal experience to behavioral output. And so the idea within neuro-linguistic programming was that once I know how you're creating your experience, then I can play with the pieces that help you, that go into the ingredients that go into creating that experience for you. And by changing those ingredients, I can help you change your experience. Okay? And there's a million different techniques, but the basic idea I call it resource reallocation.
Okay.
So the basic idea is that you are going to take a look at how you're creating an experience that might for you be dysfunctional in some way, and transform that into something that seems like something that would be helpful for you. And we would choose a technique and do that based on, you know, what the particular issue was and how you created it. So let me give you a concrete example for the bakers out there.
Okay.
And if you take flour and you take shortening and you take a couple of tablespoons of water, a dash of salt, and you mix all that stuff together, do you have any idea what you get?
You should get a biscuit.
You'd have to have an leavening agent for a biscuit.
Ah, gotcha.
So,
see, that shows you how good I am at baking, right?
Yeah, well, you're really close. That's, you know, that's the basic ingredients for pie dough.
Pie dough. Okay.
Okay. Now, let's say you mix those together and you've got pie dough, and you say, "Crap, I don't want pie dough." And,
Okay.
you know, so what are you going to do? Are you going to take all those ingredients apart? Right? Of course not.
Of course not, because you've got pie dough. Okay.
Right, exactly. Now, this is what happens for people. They get themselves in a situation, they're trying to do something in a way, perhaps maybe even enjoy what they're doing as well as doing it well, and they find that they have like anxiety, or they find that they freeze up, or they find that they get tense, or, you know, they have something that they don't want, right? So, if I can't pull it all apart and start over again, what about the idea of adding, 3/4 of a cup of sugar and 3/4 of a cup of brown sugar and a teaspoon of vanilla and a 12-ounce package of chocolate chips and some baking soda and baking powder, and then I have chocolate chip cookies.
Okay.
Right? So, or if you just added a leavening agent and used butter instead of shortening, then you could have your biscuits.
Gotcha.
Right? So the idea is, as we create our experience, we always have the option of adding things to the mix. And when you add something to the mix, it transforms your experience.
Gotcha.
Okay, now the challenge always is, what do you want to add to the mix? And where do you get this thing? Right?
Yeah, sure. Right.
And this is where, you know, the help and guidance of the strategies come in. But, you know, this is, you know, when you talk about neuro-linguistic programming, this is what the techniques that come from those traditions are really, really helpful with. So, you know, let's say someone gets, you have someone who's a hunter rider, and they get in there and they always get tense, or someone who's riding dressage and they're fine in the warm-up ring, but as soon as they start down the center line, you know, they get tense.
Mm-hmm.
And you ask them, well, what is it that you want to have, right? If you look at yourself having the problem and then look at yourself having resolved the problem, right? Things being different. What's the difference? What's the active ingredient that's missing? And a lot of times people can come up with something. So, you know, it might be something about a state in, like, you know, having suppleness, you know, a feeling of suppleness in the body. Sometimes it's more of a psychological thing, like wanting to be more confident, or to feel more competent. Sometimes it's a thing like people feeling like, you know, that feeling you have when you really don't care what other people think of you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And when you start thinking about these things, and I'm going to call them resources, when you start thinking about what you need to solve the problem, almost everybody has had experiences in their life where they felt or experienced those things. Okay? And it may be in a totally different context. You know, so if someone wanted to feel confident, right, and they may not have felt confident riding, but maybe they had moments where they felt confident in school, or they felt confident in their job, or someplace like that. And that's what the neuro-linguistic programming really, really contributes to this is this idea that you can go, and they call it, the process they use, they call it anchoring.
Mm-hmm.
You can go into those experiences and anchor that experience, how it feels in your body, your mindset, that feeling state, all of that stuff. And you can anchor it to a word or emotion or things like that. And in that way, your brain is a really great pair association tool. So you can connect an experience to a word or phrase. And then if you practice connecting those two things together, and then all of a sudden when you say the phrase, you start feeling the feelings.
Yes.
Right? And you can work it the other way. So
this is what you mean by making it portable, right? Because you can intentionally access that.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then because we have these wonderful imaginations, we can actually mentally then go back, and a lot of this stuff, while it works without hypnosis, a lot of it is really helped by a light state of hypnotic trance. Then you can have people imagine having the problem, last week or last year, and having them sort of, reimagine it, only this time, at the right time, they now have this new resource. So you're taking it and throwing a new ingredient into the recipe.
Gotcha.
And they can imagine how that would change things for them, right? So you get this laboratory where you get to test stuff out,
mm-hmm.
and then use your imagination to use it in the future once you find the right combination of things. So you can create pretty big changes in how things feel by making these feelings portable and reallocating them to new situations where they're helpful in supporting the development of the kind of performance states that you want to have.
Gotcha. Perfect. So now my mind is naturally drawn to that same process in opposition with our horses, the negative associations, my horse is afraid of men in cowboy hats, or my horse is afraid of whips, or my horse can't be mounted from a green mounting block. We're talking about basically the same things here, right? The brain has developed an association, it's just accidental rather than intentional.
Right. So that gets into people's psychological states and what we do psychologically to help ourselves. So when we are dealing with, let me say it this way, people generally don't like uncertainty. And
sure.
When there could be, potentially large negatives, like things that might be physically threatening or emotionally threatening stuff, we particularly don't like uncertainty. So one of the ways that we help ourselves is the phrase I use is we bind our anxiety. And we have a couple of different strategies that people generally use, and this is not just in riding and horses, but everywhere, to bind their anxiety, to help them calm themselves. And one of them is explanations. So, having an explanation for something allows people to make certain predictions, and then feel like then they can control it. And when you feel like you know something and you can control something, then you generally feel a little less anxious about it. Now,
okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, simply because you understand it more, right?
Right. And it doesn't really matter whether your understanding of it is correct or not. What matters is your belief in your understanding and your experience with it. So, my horse is afraid of men with cowboy hats, so I stay away from everyone with cowboy hats.
Gotcha.
And I avoid a particular situation. And then I feel like I have some understanding of it, which helps me feel less anxious about it, and in some small way, might reduce the frequency of incidents, that bother me in the first place.
Gotcha.
So that's people using avoidance strategies, to with horses, particularly when they get anxious or unpredictable, or they get bigger than people are interested or willing to deal with. That's a real common strategy to help us calm ourselves.
Okay.
Right.
Now, what about the converse of that, though? When they get into a situation where they can't avoid the men with cowboy hats, then, and I'm thinking about how the horses pick up on us so much. Then, as our anxiety increases because we can't take action to remove from that situation, that's going to increase the horse's anxiety, which kind of then becomes the self-fulfilling prophecy, right?
So this is some of the stuff that I've been thinking a lot about lately, and we were talking about 6 months ago or whatever that you don't remember.
Oh my goodness! And everybody's going to want to know what that inside joke is right there. So I'm going to have to put that out there, which is going to make I'm going to have to sip my wine before I do that. But yeah, I was just chatting with Paul before we started our conversation, and I said, I was talking with a friend of mine about this conversation that we had, and this lunch break at a clinic turned into a 3-hour conversation, and it was fascinating, and the conversation continued for 2 or 3 days during the clinic. And I said, but I'll be damned if I remember what that conversation was about. But I'm telling you guys, it was fascinating. It was awesome. But yeah, so tell me what that was. Paul, fill me in. Oh my gosh.
Well, one of the things I've been thinking a lot about lately is we have all these strategies, at least in the world of psychology, to help people with problems. And we're really focused on, helping people resolve problems. But we have not thought a lot about what does it mean to be well, in the sense that, we say, well, what is, when we think about what's going on and we think about our solutions, do they meet sort of a wellness test, right? And how do I know if a solution is a good one, right? How do I know? And I've been for those people that are interested, there's a psychiatrist named Dan Siegel who is one of the only people who publicly really has taken a really deep dive and struggling to understand, very basically, what makes us us. Because psychology really hasn't answered that question. We've gotten all caught up in the bits and pieces of things and sort of kind of set, this idea of what does it mean to be conscious and what does it mean to be self-aware and things like that. They sort of set things to the side. And out of his work, one of the things that he talks a lot about is this idea of thinking about, well, what does it mean to be well? And what does it mean to be healthy? And I love what he had to say. He's super into acronyms, which I'm not. And this is, I think, is the only one of his that I remember, if I remember it now. But he uses the acronym FACES. And he talks about flexibility, adaptability, cohesion or cohesiveness, energized, and stable. Okay? And he talks about those things as factors we need to consider when we're thinking about our overall wellness. And I love taking his stuff and thinking about what it means for us and our horses. So, when you say, if I come up and I say, my horse is afraid of men in cowboy hats, right? And you can say, okay, well, I guess you could avoid all men with cowboy hats, and that's going to avoid a certain situation, and you'll have a less frequent problem with that. But when you put it to the wellness test, is it a flexible solution? Not really. Is it adaptive? Well, it might be more or less adaptive depending on how constricted your experience is with your horse. Okay. Certainly if you take your horse into public spaces where there are people dress with cowboy hats, then it's not going to be a really adaptive one. Is it cohesive? It doesn't blend with the overall, what we think about the overall relationship and what we're striving to do with our horses in terms of having that open flow of communication, and depending on what the person is interested in doing, that's always a central piece of it. Is it energized? Maybe, but this one seems a little bit more passive to me. And is it stable? It has a sense of being brittle, right? And that
Okay.
goes with the flexibility piece. So as of late, when I think about people, I just want to engage them in this conversation, which is that is this are your solutions that you have around things with your horses, does it meet a wellness test? And what are the ways that it falls short? And then, but it's not enough to lead people down a path and say well, your solution's no good, and that's really not the point. The point is to say, look, here's some qualities and characteristics of your solution which could be better for you and for your horse. And, there are resources out there. There are people and perspectives and supports for you to learn and engage and develop alternative solutions to this, which would promote the wellness, not just of you, but your horse and you and your horse together in that relationship.
Gotcha. Very cool. So faces: flexibility, adaptability, cohesiveness, energized, and stable. All right. And by energized, you're talking active versus passive?
Well, it came across that way. I'm not gonna, I just kind of took that interpretation on the fly.
Oh, okay.
When I say energized, I mean, it can be a lot of things. I know what it means for me. It means that I'm energetically connected to what I'm doing, right? And it has to do with motivation and with the ease in which my energy comes up to help me engage in it. Like, and this is what people talk about. You're energized. You can, even when you don't want to, you get yourself up at 4 a.m. to go out and slog through the rain to go feed your horses, because there's something about that solution which really feels good to you and makes you not necessarily like you're floating around excited about all the time, but it feels good.
Okay.
Right? In that sort of energized kind of way.
Gotcha. Okay. Perfect. Cool. All right. So let me see. I've been making notes through here as we go. So we talked a little bit. We touched on the idea of how people create their experience, and I think that's something I would love to touch on, even just briefly. This idea, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but this idea basically is based on the fact that we decide on our experiences, right? Things that happen, we get to decide how we relate to those things. Is that correct? Is that how we're thinking?
That's absolutely correct. That's a piece of it.
Okay. It kind of makes me think back to the quote from, I believe it was Shakespeare. It says, "Nothing is good or bad but what thinking makes it so."
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
So there's a piece of it when you think about our construction of experience. So the phrase that comes to my mind is that the map is not the territory.
Okay.
Right. So, we have all of our ideas about the world, but we're very much removed. I mean, that's our map. But, I think we all agree, if we, pulled up our Google Maps, that is not actually the world. It's a representation of it. And because
Yes.
it's a representation of it, it is prone to certain kinds of distortions and inaccuracies.
Okay.
So, there's another side to this, which I just want to mention, and we'll go back to the idea of having some control over how you create things. There's also some very I say nuts and bolts kinds of things about creating things. For example, people might over rely on one sensory channel, right? They see something before they hear it and all the other stuff. And one way of changing our experience of things is encouraging people to process sensory information in a different order, or emphasize a different sensory channel as they're going into the experience. So there's this really kind of basic nuts and bolts playing with sensory experience that can change someone's overall experience of something, which is a pretty cool thing to play around with. Getting back to your idea is that absolutely, the meaning we make of things is really what ultimately matters, and that the meaning that we make of things may or may not reflect any sort of reality. And even if it reflects reality, we don't necessarily, some of the more functional things don't necessarily reflect reality really well.
Okay.
So, there's, 50 years ago, there's, all these studies done on depression, and, people thought that depressed people, saw the world through, shit-colored glasses.
Okay.
And really what happens is people who are depressed see the world more realistically and accurately. It's the rest of us that are looking at the world through rose-colored glasses.
Gotcha.
Right. When you're not feeling depressed, you don't attend to all certain kinds of information in the environment. So, but to your point, the really cool thing about realizing that you have created your experience is also realizing that you have power to shift or change your experience.
Yes. Okay. Sure.
And really, when you really take that to heart and understand it, it's incredibly empowering.
Sure.
It doesn't necessarily make it easy to change.
Yes. Right.
Right. And depending on the circumstances, change may take a tremendous amount of effort and work to create it, but the possibility for growth and change is there. So that
presupposes ownership.
Yes.
Right. In this case, in the humans side of things, on the rider or the equestrian or the athlete or whoever we're talking about, that's presupposing ownership of or knowledge of how they are accepting or creating their experience. Right. I think about, and maybe I'm wrong in how I'm thinking about this, but I think about the idea that, oh, my horse bucked me off. Well, your horse wasn't actually trying to buck you off. You just couldn't sit his reaction. But because their thoughts are, my horse bucked me off, now it's the horse did something to me.
Right. It's personal.
It's personal. Yeah.
Yeah, because that's the way most people process things.
Right.
Because we're relational beings. So we're going to immediately go for a relational explanation of stuff.
Yes. Okay. Right.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Perfect.
Right. So my horse bucked me off. It imbues the horse with a certain kind of intention.
Yes.
Right. It then can lead someone to be thinking about things in a particular direction. You're evaluating this horse's investment in their relationship, and could ultimately make it easier for somebody to say, well, that horse just doesn't like me, and for some people that might mean getting a different horse.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't. If you are willing to take a different perspective and say, okay, so let me look at this from this perspective, that this happened and my horse did this thing, and let's take your perspective.
Yeah.
And I was not able at that moment in order to sit through my horse's reaction.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? That leads to a whole different world of exploration and leads you down a very different path. Now, so you begin to say, well, what's going on that I was not able to sit that reaction?
Right. Right.
So was it a balance issue? Is it a fitness issue? Is it experience issue? Is it, what does it happen to be?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
It's just a damn horse bucked me off, Paul.
So if you start thinking about that and you start coming up with some answers, for yourself, let's say, so, for me, there's certain things that I know. I know, for example, that if I get bucked off, the first thing that I always think about is what signals was I not reading?
Mm-hmm.
And the reason that I go there is because for me, I know that at my age and level of fitness, that I'm only going to be able to sit so many of certain kinds of bucks that, 20 years ago might have been a different story.
Gotcha. Okay, sure.
And so I need to be realistic about my ability to sit the buck or sit the reaction. So I'm going to work on seeing if I can divert the reaction, as well as best I can. Can I get what I want accomplished without the horse getting to the point where they're reacting? And to the degree that I can't do that, and I've done this, I've sent along a horse that I couldn't resolve the bucking issue. I had a horse one time, and we don't have time for the whole story tonight, but he had what I called an intermittent explosive bucking disorder.
That's a good name.
Yeah. and that was at a time in my life where I actually had a pretty good season, was pretty fit and stuff, but I had, so this is a whole other ball of wax too. Think about the ways you think about things. There's context. So I had a 2-year-old and one on the way. And I just kept thinking, I could keep working on resolving this, but I can't afford to get hurt. I can't afford to do that. And I did actually work really hard with 4 different trainers to get it figured out. And nobody was able to really help me through it. So at the time, now I have other sources, and I'm confident that had I been faced with that today, I would be able to see a different way through it. But at the time, context was everything. So at any rate, part of what I was saying about your question is that having a different way to think about it and a different way to think it through can be really, really helpful. And it doesn't even necessarily mean that you come to a different conclusion, right?
Sure,
But it does open the doorway to finding a different path through, and sometimes resolving a problem that you that you sort of saw as a hopeless, innate, and stable characteristic of your equine partner. These are really cool things, and often excite people when they discover these other ideas and pathways forward. And it also helps people resolve a lot of when they're able to open themselves to a different way of thinking. A lot of times it helps them resolve the emotional challenges they face and their riding with their horses. It's one of my most effective interventions with people who have been overfaced and are anxious and stuff is to refer them to somebody that does something totally different that they know nothing about. So if they've been in the hunter-jumper world, then I refer them to someone like yourself, classical dressage or natural horsemanship or other things like that, where they get exposed to a wholly different view on what it is that they're doing. And that new level of understanding of both themselves and the horse and how that relationship, is developed and fostered is often enough to help people really change their emotional experience and overcome their anxiety and fear and find a way to move forward where they can enjoy themselves again.
Gotcha. So similar, I'm guessing then, to the idea that we think about with horses, where curiosity is the opposite of fear, right? So we can kind of challenge that fear by helping them to become more curious. As you're saying, helping them to learn from somebody that's in complete opposition or totally different from what they are used to.
So, let's see. Yeah, we'll go down this road. So, on one sense, when you talk about curiosity being the opposite of fear, there are, there's oh my God, I can't remember his name. He's like one of the primary figures in anxiety and phobias.
Uh-oh. Did
all the research on it. But what he talked about is that there are incompatible emotional responses. And
incompatible emotional responses.
So, for example, relaxation and anxiety are incompatible emotional responses.
Okay.
You cannot be relaxed if you're anxious, and you cannot be anxious if you're relaxed. It's not possible.
Okay.
So, there is, in that sense, you can think about things as sort of polar opposites, right? And if you find, I don't think curiosity is the opposite of fear.
Okay.
I think there's two separate things. And for those who want to geek out on the brain science of it, refer them to a guy who recently passed away. His name was Jaak Panksepp. He literally wrote the book on the neurobiology of emotions. And he talks about 7 primary emotions which map to 7 areas of the brain, functional areas of the brain. Out of his work, and also out of the work in psychology that's known as attachment theory and literature, is the idea that we have certain drives, right? And you talk about fear, that really is a drive for self-preservation or a drive for security.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Right? So we have a primary drive. That's an innate drive to keep ourselves safe. Sure. Right? So regardless of context and age and everything, from the time you were born, you had a drive to keep yourself safe, right? And secure. And that's why babies scream when they need their diaper changed and when they need to eat and stuff like that, because that brings the attachment figure, the person who helps them stay safe and alive. At the same time, we are all born, by the way, all of that I'm saying I think is true about horses, which is another thing I've been thinking a lot about lately.
Yes.
We also have an innate drive for exploration and play. So on the equine side of things, I remember when Revel was born, and he was actually born out in a shed, and we put him in the foaling stall that night. And I remember taking him out the first day, right afterwards. It was a nice sunshiny day, and they're out in the pasture, and it was in May, so it's late spring. And, first he's like glued to mama's hip, right? You've seen these foals glued to mama's hip. You see them matching strides. Right?
Yes.
It's an amazing thing to have them matching strides. All of that is about safety and security. Proximity seeking all of the syncing up and everything is all about safety and security. And then you watch, and if you watch them, you notice that all of a sudden, they're sniffing over here, right? And they're the picture of the foal out in the field, like sniffing the butterfly, or this whole Bambi image is one of our cartoons, or they start exploring, right? And then the grasshopper jumps up, right? And what does the foal do? It's flying back to mama's side.
Yes.
Right? And then as things progress, they explore, they learn certain things, they forage, play with other horses, engage the world. They start feeling more secure on their own, and you'll find them further and further away from mom. But still, at the first sign of danger, they're right back there.
Back to safety.
Right. And so we humans do the same thing. If anyone's ever had toddlers, they know how they do this. They kind of go 10 feet away and they stop and they turn around and they look back at mom or dad, to make sure they're watching, right? But that's all about staying safe. And then they have to, it's like a biological drive. Kids learn how to ride a skateboard, right?
Right.
They don't just get on the skateboard and are content at rolling around. No, as soon as they can do that, then they're trying to skateboard downstairs and go down, grind down rails and do all that stuff. Kids with ponies.
Right.
They're not content to their pony and just walk around in a circle.
Right. Right. We want to jump all the things. And
right. We want to jump all the things. We want to race. We want to go on adventures. We want to do all this stuff. That's a biological imperative. Now, you get back to your fear versus curiosity question. The challenge that we all face as people, and our horses face as well, is that the drive for security is necessarily primary. So all things being equal, if I'm going to be safe or I'm going to explore, other than a small group of people who explore at the expense of safety, there are some people who do that. They're different than the typical person, but the typical person, as well as the typical horse, if they're faced with that choice, they will choose to be safe.
Gotcha. Yep, sure.
So for all of us, when we find ourselves challenged, right, and when we find our curiosity and our willingness to step out of our comfort zone compromised, it's because we're not feeling safe. And the solution is not to force people to feel unsafe, because you can't force curiosity.
Right.
You can't force exploration. You can't force play. But what we can do, and as adults we can do this for ourselves, is we can start asking ourselves the question, okay, what are the ways that we feel unsafe? And what can we do to help us feel now not perfectly safe, that's not the idea, but where we feel safe enough to then engage our curiosity and to engage our sense of play and exploration. And that's where our willingness to step out of our comfort zone comes from.
Okay.
Now, the primary place that people find that is in relationships, because we're relational beings. So just like the foal looks to the mare for for his safety, we look to caregivers for ours, and then as kids we look to some peers and adults, and as adults we look to each other and to our teachers and to things like that, right? And so this gets another thing that you mentioned before we came out of the air. Okay, this is so let me finish this first, and then we'll go on a slightly different tack.
Okay.
So if I'm having a hard time, engaging my exploration play, I can, well, what's going on that I'm not feeling safe enough to do that? And first place I look is relationships. Do I feel like my trainer has the knowledge and is interested in me and really understands what I'm up against? And, can I trust them? Do I have the support of my barn mates, my support of my friends, this kind of stuff. The other stuff is, about, do I have the resources that I need to be safe? So maybe my sense of fear is a physical one rather than a psychological one, right?
Okay.
And, right? So I hopped on a horse today. Well, a couple of days ago, I turned my ankle. And I didn't do as much on this horse today as I would have done on any other time because I knew that if something went south, I'd have to jump off.
Gotcha. Right. And having injured your ankle, okay.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. So people can feel physically threatened. It might have to do with issues of fitness, or maybe there's certain things inherent with advancing age, or maybe there be other kinds of limitations, things, or maybe it's they have a horse whose current state of mind and level of training or temperament is a challenging one for them, where they feel physically unsafe, or maybe the activity they're doing is one that carries inherent risks that they don't feel they can keep themselves safe in. So there's lots of these questions about safety, and that kind of goes to risk as well. So there's psychological safety, and there's physical safety, there's emotional safety, where people feel ashamed, which sort of gets back down to other things. And then the thing that we had talked about is one of my pet peeves is the amount of abuse that goes on, often physical, and of course now we're having organizations like USAF addressing things like sexual abuse that has been going on, but the emotional abuse that happens in the context or under the guise of training, or teaching is just outrageous, and it's so incredibly destructive for the very reasons that we're talking about now, because it's inherent in us, right? To in order to advance and be healthy and grow, to need to feel safe and feel safe enough. And we have so many people that grow up in their riding with a level of fear and anxiety, which then ultimately, shows itself in a lot of different ways. Whether it's self-judgment, how many people have problems showing because they're worried about what people think of them.
Right.
And maybe that's a family of origin thing, or maybe that's because they had a trainer as a kid that they could never please, and was screaming at them all the time, right?
Yes, right.
And shaming them and embarrassing them. And I challenge anybody to, and I'm happy to read it if they find it, to find a study, either in education or sports psychology or anywhere, which shows that being emotionally abusive helps people perform better or learn faster or anything. There's nothing that supports that. None.
Right.
Other than people wanting to excuse themselves.
Yes, absolutely. People wanting to excuse themselves. You're absolutely right. We see this, and I hate to call it out like it is, but we see plenty of clinicians that will just beat people up, or trainers that will just verbally, right, not physically. Hopefully, if they're doing it, they're not doing it in public anyway. That are verbally and emotionally just beating people up to try to, I don't know. I don't know if it's an attempt to try to make them better, or if it's just an attempt to make themselves feel better. I don't know. And I see that, I hate to admit it, I see it too often. Riders that come with fears and anxieties that have been caused by that, by trainers beating them up, by clinicians beating them up, by the judgment from their peers. We think about it as the barn bullying, right? Or the arena bullying, which, as you said, it does nothing, at least from my experience, does nothing but cause them to want to leave, right? To excuse themselves or to hide or to just completely shut down, which is the opposite of, you know, being open to learning, right? Or it's not helpful for the idea of learning.
Right, and in its worst manifestations can lead to some, you know, pretty terrible stuff for people.
Absolutely.
In terms of their emotional health over time, especially when we're, you know, bringing up kids in that context over time.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So how do we help people with this? I shouldn't say we. How do you help people with this? How do psychologists help people with this? How can you get somebody over that?
Well, I think there is no very simple answer. What you have is, you know, individuals with individual experiences. So there are some common ingredients to that. You know, the first thing is really to support people, and it often takes a lot of support. Is to support people to seek out, you know, another situation where the person they're working with is skilled and professional and not abusive. Because unfortunately, a lot of the times people feel that, you know, these, you know, people who are abusive, it's not like they, you know, they don't have any redeeming qualities. But often people feel very beholden to them for one reason or another.
Yes, they're on some sort of pedestal.
Yeah, and either a pedestal or they feel like, and this is one thing that happens in, you know, in the equestrian world quite often, is that relationships are both professional and friendships. Mm-hmm. So people feel like they're betraying somebody if they, you know, if they say, look, I don't want you to train me anymore. Gotcha. Right? I don't want to take lessons from you anymore. I want to move barns, right? There's that, and that fear of reprisal, because they're already feeling beaten up and bullied as it is. Mm-hmm. So often, you know, at least one piece of the equation is to help people understand through talking with them over time and understanding the situation and helping them explore different ways to look at their experience, you know, connect them to the idea that they're, you know, that what they've experienced is bullying or abusive, and that they are free to make other choices. And often a lot of my work is just getting them to that point. And a lot of times once they're able to make that shift and find somebody who approaches it and treats them with professionalism and respect, and has a different approach to teaching, that often is enough to just skyrocket things forward in terms of their enjoyment of things. And then, you know, one of the things that is it's not unique to me, but there's a lot of times sports psychology consultants, you know, that's what they are, and that's their training, and they work around performance issues. One of the advantages I have is I've also been a psychotherapist for 30 years. So that really gives me a broader range of tools and perspectives, so that in addition to helping people deal with, you know, their feelings around the sport, if there are other things that they need to sort through, whether it be issues about anxiety or depression or dealing with relationship issues and stuff, that's all kinds of other sorts of skill sets that I bring to it, and that I'm comfortable and capable of helping them deal with other things as well. And most commonly what that involves is people who are dealing with what we would know as post-traumatic stress after having experiences. Sometimes it comes even in the context of these emotionally abusive experiences. Other times it comes from, you know, being overfaced and people getting hurt or injured. Different people react to that differently. Some bounce right back pretty quickly, and other people get it triggers trauma for them. So there's other things that I can do to help people through those situations.
Okay. So the advice then for people saying, what do we do now, is to just seek a completely different experience.
Well, I think that's really helpful, and I often suggest to people, like, seeking a whole different perspective doesn't mean that you have to quit what you do, right?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Some people object and they say, well, I really love, eventing. Why are you telling me to go work cows?
Yeah, sure.
Right? I'm not telling you to go work cows. And, just go out there and there's a really wide world of differing perspectives, and go look and see what's out there. A lot of times, and this is something that's unique, I think, to the horse world, has to do with people's choice of discipline and what they're exposed to.
Mm-hmm.
I ask people if they know why, I was a hunter-jumper rider. And they say, well, because you love to jump. I said, no, because when I said I wanted to ride, my mother went out and took me to a hunter-jumper bar.
There you go.
Right, that's what I do.
Right.
It's only later in life that I've discovered, the 30 million other things that are just a blast to do with horses, right? So, I really encourage people that when they're feeling, super challenged in what they're doing, is to really look for differing perspectives and see if that can help them move through things. If they're dealing with specific roadblocks to what they're doing, performance anxiety, or having a difficult time dealing with pressure and competition and other things like that, that's something that I can help people with in a pretty straightforward way. I work with them just to, we talked earlier, mentioned those 5 conditions for change.
Mm-hmm.
I can help people kind of get themselves set up to make some pretty quick changes. They don't really need to suffer, for those more circumscribed things. I can really help them with that, and in a pretty focused and short-term kind of way. And then if people find that they are aware that they have larger concerns, or that some of the things they struggle with their horses are things they also struggle with in other areas of their life, that's something else that they don't have to suffer with. That there are people there that can help them sort through that stuff and make some larger changes, so that they find more joy in their life, and also in their work with their horses.
Perfect. So you did mention earlier the 5 conditions for change, but I don't think we outlined those. What are those 5 conditions? You called them the 5 essential conditions for change.
Right. So when I first started doing the NLP work, the linguistic programming, it worked every time. And then all of a sudden, I had one client and it didn't work. And I was thinking, like, oh crap, so here's another tool that was overpromised.
Okay, sure.
It's not going to be helpful to me. Well, I got the next training I went to. Ron talked about the 5 essential conditions for change, and those are: number 1 is the unequivocal desire to change. So if someone comes to ask you to help you with the change, and you hear a yes but, or equivocation, well, I really want to do this, but
yeah,
then you are in a position where you have to deal with the equivocation before you're really going to be able to help somebody change.
Gotcha.
So that's the one, is an unequivocal desire to change. The second one is that the change needs to be, the language he would use is stated in the positive. What that means is you have to know what you want to do differently. It's not enough to know.
Versus what you want to stop doing, right?
It's right. it's not enough to know what you don't want.
Gotcha. Okay. And that's, am I right? That's because of how we process the negative?
Yeah, so one of the challenges, and this sort of leads to and I always tell everybody this, and I actually believe it to be true, that if they never remember anything else that I tell them, is the idea that our brains don't process the not.
Right.
And so when you say I don't want to, throw my weight forward when I jump,
sure.
you are mentally rehearsing throwing your weight forward. So you're
Sure.
actually practicing it. And the only way to change it is to be very clear on what you want to do differently and focus on that piece. So for a trainer, and I get caught up in this all the time. I was actually struggling with this today. I had a client I was working with, and they were doing some work with a horse online, and they kept backing up. They kept stepping back, right? And the first thing I want to say is, don't step backwards.
Oh, sure. Right.
Right? Because it's so instinctive to us. But I have to challenge myself when I'm helping someone do something different, is to keep focused on what is it that I want them to do. Step forward, step forward, step forward. I want you to think step forward, step forward. And for an instructor who wants to help someone, some people are really good at this. I just admire instructors and trainers who are super good at this. Are always saying, hands up, put your leg back, shift your weight back, you focus on what they want to do. So when you get back to the idea of change, so you have to want to change, and you have to know what you want to do differently.
Yes.
And
so it's the idea of even telling yourself, rather than don't panic, don't wet your pants, right? It's more relax, breathe, focus, think.
Exactly. Right. So they have to really think through and decide, what mindset, what state of mind, what feeling state, what thoughts I want to have. What is it that I want to happen in that moment, in that situation? Mm-hmm. Which brings to the third one, is that it has to be contextual or context specific. And the language I learned was context behavioral, but that doesn't really help me. But it has to be context specific. So you have to understand under what set of circumstances do you want to do this behavior that's different from what you used to do.
Gotcha.
So to say, I just want to be relaxed all the time.
Sure, right.
No, it's when I'm riding, when I'm riding in my test,
okay,
massage test, and I ask for the canter, and I feel my horse's back roach. I want to do this.
Yes, gotcha.
So and the timing of things is really important. One of the stories I share is I had a rider who used to have a lot of anxiety going into the show ring, and we worked a lot with a lot of these tools we talked about tonight about changing her experience as she entered the show ring, and nothing ever really changed. I thought, what's going on here? And I thought, well, maybe the context is wrong. So I started doing a little digging, and we started talking about it for, and I asked her, well, where do you first feel this anxiety? She said, oh, well, it's the night before when I clean my boots and I'm putting them in the trailer.
Ah.
Right? So the idea is that, we need to really be reflective on our experience and really be able to make changes at the correct moment where the maladaptive responses are really having an effect. And if we intervene at the wrong moment, we might have some positive effect, but mostly it may not be really, really helpful. So for that situation, we started inserting the resource. I don't remember specifically what resources they were. Maybe they were confidence or peace of mind or calmness or something like that. As she's putting her boots in the trailer, right? And we rehearsed that and changed that in that specific context. And then she could sort of see it through, and getting up the next morning, she's in a different mood, and then she's able to remember to use some other tools that she has in terms of a pre-write routine and things of that sort. So you really can help people move forward in that way. So that was the third one, was contextual. The change has to be self-initiated and self-maintained.
Self-initiated and self-maintained. So in other words, you're doing it, somebody else isn't having to do it for you.
Exactly. So
that's number 4?
Wanting your horse to change or your trainer to change is not going to help.
Gotcha.
Right? And you have to focus on things that you actually have some influence and control over, which unfortunately is generally limited to ourselves.
Sure. Mm-hmm. So that's number 4, self-initiated and self-maintained. Okay.
Right. And then the last one is that it has to be future-oriented. We can change the meaning of the past, but we cannot change the past. We can only change things moving forward.
Ooh, I like that line.
You can write it down. That one's actually mine.
I'm writing that one down. We can change the meaning of the past, but we can't change the past. Is that what you said?
Yeah. Perfect. But we can change what we do moving forward.
Gotcha. I'm quiet for a moment because I'm writing that down. That's fantastic.
So it's my experience, and I suspect people would find this particularly helpful in any context, but it's my experience that when I'm able, my biggest job when someone comes in the door is to help them meet those 5 conditions for change. And we may never even really talk about them, objectively, but that's what I'm thinking about. I'm trying to help them get to a place where they've dealt with the buts, where they've gotten really clear on what they envision for themselves, where they understand the ways, the resources they have and when it would be helpful to apply them. And, that these be things that they have some agency over. They're things that they can do for themselves, moving forward. So, this is sort of interwoven in almost everything I do. And I think if people really reflect on this when they get around the business of, and they're ready to do some things, that, making sure that they're addressed all these things, it can be really, really helpful for them.
That's perfect. So what would you give as primary advice starting out for people that are dealing with, maybe I shouldn't lump these together. Would you lump fears and anxieties together?
The quick answer is yes and no.
Okay.
They often run in packs. I don't know that this is a really good way to think about them, but I often do think about them this way. Is I use the word fear when there is a real danger and or a real experience of being hurt, and I use anxiety and more in terms of things that are imagined. And it may not be a fair description, so
okay.
But that's, to me, is somewhat generally helpful.
Okay.
At least to be thinking about the idea. Well, is there something? Because anxiety, fear, whatever you want to call it, is there to keep us safe. So
yes.
There are some times where it's really helpful to be afraid.
Sure. Yeah. That makes sense.
Right.
it keeps me from, jumping off cliffs and playing in traffic and things like that.
Right. So, people struggling with fear and anxiety, a lot depends on the context and what they're faced with. But the first question I ask is this a realistic concern? Could I really be hurt?
Okay.
Or injured? Is this fear or anxiety I have based in reality? Am I going to be? And when I say hurt, I don't mean have my feelings hurt. I mean really damaged in some way.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be the first question I'd ask, and then I would encourage people and thinking about it is the second thing I'd have them think about is, well, what are their motivations, and to what degree does this experience sort of get in the way of their motivations and goals, and how much does it interfere with it? Okay, so my lovely wife has put up with my horse craziness for a long time, and it's coming on 31 years now, and she's not a horse person. Right, so she made an attempt at one point and was taking some lessons, and things were going reasonably well, and then the horse spooked at the chickens and she fell off, and she came in that night. She said, I'm not comfortable doing this, and if I worked really, really hard, I might get comfortable enough to go on a trail ride with you, sometime or something like that. She said, but I just don't really want to do it.
Ah, well, there you go.
So I'm not going to do it. And it's a perfect example that where she was faced with a certain kind of anxiety, and then so the second question I ask is, do you want to, need to, whatever, tackle that particular anxiety? Is it important enough to you?
Gotcha.
To really tackle it? And then if the answer to that is yes, then I would start looking at what are the, thinking about what are your goals, where do you want to get to, and thinking about, what resources do you have around you to help you with that. What are the ways that you can help? Now, in those resources, they can be, we can talk about things like, the appropriate trainer and someone who's got the skills and awareness and is in your camp. We can talk about a setting, maybe, had a couple of clients who, went from sort of, high intensity show barns to going to more of a lower key barn where there wasn't as much pressure to perform. People still showed, but, it wasn't showing all the time. And they had a community of people who just enjoyed, were having fun. So those kinds of things, having that setting. Physical resources. Do I have the skills I need? Do I have the knowledge I need to tackle these fears and anxieties and these dangers to me? Am I physically fit? So on and so forth. And then, we talked about the importance of that sense of security and engaging the part of us that wants to learn, explore, get curious, tackle things, play, and that, that question, do I have the relationships around me that I need to help me feel safe enough, and tackle whatever it is that is challenging you. So, I think that would be the next step is to think about that idea of what resources do I need around me. So if you've identified, sort of the source of it, if you've decided that you really want to tackle it, and then you're surrounded by, you sort of take a look and you do a really good job of, getting the resources that you need around you. And then if you need additional help, there are people like myself, that can help, sometimes just help people get over stuck spots,
Okay.
Other times provide, an additional support, additional piece of that equation, to provide a situation which helps them feel safe enough and moving forward. So that's how I would respond to your question.
Gotcha. Now, what about What about self-doubt? Would you put that in there in a similar category, in the same category?
Um, Self-doubt, there. So you could put it in the same category and address it the same way, even right down to, is it realistic?
Okay, sure, yeah.
You know, I mean, there are situations when I have limited knowledge, skill, or experience where I should have some appropriate self-doubt.
Right.
So, you know, and that's healthy because that keeps me safe and it keeps me, you know, gathering resources and all that sort of stuff. You know, so one of the things to think about is it, the distinction is state or trait. So is it this certain situation that I feel this in, but most of the other places in my life I don't feel it? That's something that you can tackle in you know, in a pretty straightforward way and start, you know, asking questions about the specific situation. What is it about this situation where I doubt myself? And what resources can I bring to bear? How can I change how I am in those situations? And a lot of the same stuff applies. If I'm a person who, with honest reflection, and, you know, just doubt myself in everything, you know, that's a bigger change agenda.
So that's more trait rather than state.
Exactly.
Okay.
Right. And, you know, in the same way that some people, it's not really, their anxiety is not really about showing. They're anxious about pretty much everything.
Gotcha. Okay.
Right. And that's, you know, and it's just there are people who naturally are that way. And, you know, and there are some, they tend to be highly sensitive individuals, which brings with it certain kinds of positives in many situations. But in other situations, they really struggle with it. And when it's a trait, when they sort of carry that through everything, then, you know, it's a bigger change agenda. You know, one perhaps worth taking on, but a longer term agenda.
Gotcha. Okay. Awesome. So we've got some questions coming in from the audience.
Okay.
Let's see. And I was actually hoping with you to touch on some kind of goal setting ideas, and we've had some questions come in about that, but I feel like that's a whole nother broadcast in itself.
We certainly could do a whole nother broadcast if they have some specific, if they want, you know, some quick tips. I can run that through that now. But
cool. Well, I'll tell you what. Actually, let's do that before we get to our listener questions, and we've got several of those that are coming in. But let's go. We're gonna kind of change focus slightly. Let's go to quick tips for goal setting.
Okay. So there's a lot of what I'm going to say is commonly known from the business world and been applied to pretty much every other kind of goal setting. What I would say before I start talking is that a lot of times people get caught up in one quality or aspect of a goal, and then they start saying, you know, this is really important, and that's, you know, not a good way to do it. And they usually talk about trying to make goals more specific, and that people have these, you know, big, what I call aspirational goals, and they say, well, that'll never get you anywhere. But what I want to say first is that there's a lot of different kinds of goals that are helpful to have. and
okay.
And, you know, it's, you know, the goals provide direction. You know,
yes.
They're like the steering wheel of our efforts. And when you start thinking about the way you formulate goals, and then you think about the way you pursue your horsemanship, you get a really clear idea whether you're going for a Sunday drive, sort of wandering through the countryside, or, you know, whether you're trying to get somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And with people with performance goals, you know, who really want to get somewhere, then it needs to be supported by formulating the goals in very specific ways in order to help them move forward. So, first thing, aspirational goals. I think it is important to have people kind of have big picture stuff that really lights them up, that kind of touches their heart, because without that, then our efforts are not really energized. It gets kind of cold and clinical, and when things get tough, we don't have something to sort of spur us forward.
Gotcha.
That being said, the acronym that's most commonly used in a whole ton of different settings is really helpful, is this idea of SMART goals.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And the acronym SMART, God, let's see if I can remember this. I'm not an acronym guy. So the first quality of a well-formed goal, we'll talk about it being specific. Okay. And there are different levels of specificity. So, you might, so let me get through this first, and then we'll talk about another aspect of it. So, your goal, is it specific? So when you sit down and say, well, I am going to be able to do a shoulder in at the trot with my horse, and both directions, right? Okay, versus, I want to ride and be able to do classical dressage thing.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Right? So, taking your goals and really making them more specific, really helpful. They have to be measurable. And you really need to have a way of knowing when you've achieved your goal. And part of the reason for this is human beings by nature are terrible at assessing their own progress. Yeah. Usually we key into something that's not going well, we throw up our hands and say, I haven't gotten anywhere. So it is important not just to know when we've achieved our goals, but it's also important to know when we haven't achieved our goals.
Sure.
And we need to revise them, or to draw on more resources, or to figure things out. So specific, measurable. The goals we set should be achievable. It's fine to set the bar high, but if you set the bar too high, and it's not realistically achievable, then it just leads to demoralization. And that's even more important when goals are being constructed in relationship with a trainer, when someone else has input in it, because when someone else is really helping or driving the goal setting process, and they make unachievable goals for their students, it's totally demoralizing, and it's one of those things that people end up feeling beaten up about.
Gotcha.
So they should be achievable. What's the R? Relevant. Goals should be relevant to what you do. I want to compete, my horse at second level dressage, and my goal is to eat ice cream 3 days a week. Right? What you're doing really should relate directly to your achieving, the larger goals that you have.
Okay.
And a lot of times, this is, we can make up all kinds of ridiculous examples, but it's really interesting how, sometimes we get really focused on things, that seem really important to us, but realistically don't matter.
Okay.
Or don't help us. And that's, it's really helpful a lot of times. And I suggest that people sit down with their instructors and trainers, a couple times a year, to go through all this stuff with them, and really talk about where we're going, and how we're going to get there, and how should I be thinking about this, or what are the skills I need to learn, and so on and so forth. Really set up, some realistic goals for themselves. So, when you have someone that's working with you, they're, looking and say, well, it's at this point, it's really nice that you'd like to be able to do this thing, but prior to that, you like to perfect your sitting trot, but prior to that, let's work on having independent and soft hands, and a lively conversation with the bit.
Okay.
The horse's mouth through the reins a bit, so it may not be irrelevant, but it may be a later step or something that people should work on, something they can work on, but it's not really going to get them where they need to go right now.
Gotcha.
And the final thing is time bound. So, when we set goals, we ought to give ourselves some deadlines. And if we don't meet the deadlines, okay, but we can be honest about what we've done up to that point, and we can evaluate whether it was a lack of our investment and effort, or whether we're just not there yet and we need to revise our goal. But if we don't have time bounds on our goals, then they just often really drift out and extend out into the ether sphere, and we'll never accomplish things.
Gotcha.
So that's that. If people remember that acronym, that's a really helpful thing for them. SMART goals, when they're setting goals for themselves. The other thing I was reminded of is there's also a distinction in goals between what we call outcome goals and process goals.
Okay.
An outcome goal, might be something like, I want to, let's say for me, an outcome goal might be I want to enter the family class at the Upperville show in 2019. Okay.
Okay.
So I want to do what I need to do to get there. So actually, another outcome goal, I want to win the family class.
Okay.
Right. So there's this interesting thing about outcome goals that, they can be really helpful. Like, I want to get to the place where I'm competing at this show or that show or the other thing. But once they get focused on things that we don't really control, like blue ribbons,
okay,
or championships or things of that sort, they become, those kind of outcome goals can be really destructive. They're certainly destructive for kids. You watch these kids, that are, I work with a lot of kids on the A circuit, and, if they've stepped into it in a way that, let's say locally, and they were doing really, really well, and then they step it up a notch, and now, they're only getting a championship every third show they go to, and they're devastated because they're used to winning all the time, and they never sat down and said, my goal is a blue ribbon, but they developed this implicit outcome goal.
Yes. Okay.
Right? And then they feel frustrated all the time and upset, and then that chips away at their sense of themselves. And what I suggest for people, and actually you'll find this to be a quality of top competitors, certainly top equestrian competitors, is that they focus primarily on what we call process goals. So they're looking at their horse's performance in the context of what they're trying to accomplish in their training and where they are at that given time, and did they and their horse put forward a good effort? Did the things that they're working on, make a difference in the performance, whether or not they get a ribbon?
Gotcha.
So that these competitions are much more kind of like, okay, where are we in this process of getting to wherever it is that we want to be, rather than needing to win a ribbon every time that they're in it. Have to have a particular outcome.
Gotcha.
Right?
So we could say then that the process goal is more developmental, the outcome goal is more thing focused.
Right.
Okay.
And it might be developmental for you as a rider, the development of a skill or the application of a skill, or
okay,
other qualities or characteristics of you as a rider. Could be in your horse, developing strength, could be fine tuning things, and refining things that things that you've chosen to work on and that you can get better. Those kinds of things are things that fall in the process goal category.
okay. Fantastic. Good. That's a lot to think about for sure. And I do think we could certainly do a whole other broadcast getting more specific about these things. So we're gonna definitely have to do that. So a couple of our questions coming in. Let's see, there is one here. I wanted to make sure that I didn't lose it through the comments here, so I wrote it down. What are your thoughts on using EDMR for a rider that has anxiety, fears, etc. after a riding accident? This one came from Rachel, and for our listeners out there, she expanded on that more. The EMDR being eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. Yeah. So what is that? I've not heard of that before.
So it actually, historically, there's actually some controversy over how it got started.
Uh-oh.
But we won't go into that. So EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, one of the interesting things about the way we operate in the world is that the way we think is associated to certain eye movements that we make.
Oh yes, okay.
Right. So, and you can mess around with this with your friends. You can, like, one of the things that you can do is look at them and say, just that you want to ask a question, and do they remember the house they grew up in? What color was the front door?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And people will, when they do that, they'll either look up to the right or up to the left. And that will tell you where they typically look to remember visual information. And
okay.
And if they look so you look up for visual information. And you tend to, people look down and to the right when they are processing emotional information. So when there's a reason, there's an expression called downright blue.
Oh, okay.
And people tend to look down and to the left when they're processing auditory information, like internal conversations and stuff like that. So when they're thinking about dialogue in their head, they'll look down and to the left. Now, none of that is essential to know, but the idea, the concept is that the way we process information is connected to our eye movements. This particular intervention capitalizes on that.
Okay.
And at the risk of outrageously oversimplifying the whole thing, the idea is to have people process traumatic events while they are moving they're moving their eyes in certain patterned ways. So the therapist is helping them to, they might track a light pen or something, to move their eyes in certain ways while they're discussing a traumatic event. Okay? Yeah, and there's a lot of different thoughts as to, why or how this is helpful. We don't have to go into all the theory behind it. There is a growing and solid body of research to suggest that these interventions can help many, many people in overcoming trauma. And it is certainly something that I would recommend for someone if you have a qualified EMDR practitioner and you want to give that a shot in overcoming trauma, you can have reasonable expectations of success. So I would support them in doing that. The reality is that nothing works all the time for everybody. Mm-hmm. So just be aware that what I suggest to people, if they are giving something a shot, just to be aware that if it doesn't work for them as well as they would like, that there's other avenues for help as well, that they don't have to despair if it doesn't work out. But absolutely support them. If it's something they're interested in, they have a person that can help them with that, and a lot of riders have success with that specific intervention in helping them with trauma.
Very interesting. Very interesting. So Anne Marie types in, do you have any advice on anxiety after some bad falls, worrying that the same thing will happen?
There's a lot of practical things. So that's a situation where I and I know we don't have time to do it. I would want to gather a lot of information about context, and the horse and when this happens, and are you in the same context, and so on and so forth. And because one of the challenges that I have is I don't want to make a recommendation to someone that puts them in danger.
Sure. Just jump on. Everything will be fine.
And I'm not there, and I don't know the horse, and I don't know the person and the trainer and stuff like that. So I always want to start with that. There are a couple of practical things which I think are really helpful in dealing with anxieties from falls. And the first one is that if it's connected to one particular horse, and you have access to other horses, ride as many other horses as you can, as often as you can, to start with. So, I often share, people are interested, they can go to my blog, and I still think, there's a few of them up there about when my horse took off on me and dumped me in the field and kicked me in the head. So, spent a couple days in the hospital, and one of the essential things for me in that recovery process was, a few weeks later when I was cleared to ride, that, I went and I was fox hunting with, at another barn, not with this horse, and I was on and I was riding 2 or 3 or 4 other horses, even some challenging ones, and just sort of allowing myself the freedom to ride without the worry of that particular horse was really helpful. The other advice I would give, and it is really, unfortunately, it's like so many things. I'm going to describe a process which is really simple. It's just not easy. And sometimes it really helps to have a consultant there to kind of work you through it so you're making good choices. It's kind of like having someone say, well, how do I train my horse to do a Piaf? And you could describe some things, in a conversation, but really, there's a lot of subtlety that goes into it to help people be successful. But the basic idea in dealing with your anxiety is to set up a situation where you can step a little bit out of your comfort zone. And, we talked about early on about that importance of feeling safe enough, right, to engage your willingness to step out of your zone. And that idea is important, is that you step a little bit out. The other thing which is really, really important is that once you step out of your comfort zone, don't jump back into it right away. Stay out there and outside your comfort zone until you start to calm down and feel a little more comfortable, and then reward yourself by stepping back into your comfort zone. There's the same story. I got on Rebel that first time after the accident, and I thought that was the hardest thing I ever did. I got on, walked him around the arena, trotted around, jumped off and said, I gotta do it. I'm so brave.
Yes.
Right? Well, actually, the hardest thing I ever did was getting on him the next time, because what I realized was that I wasn't on him long enough, and what I did is I rewarded myself for getting off.
Okay, yeah, sure.
Myself for getting on. That and that next time it was like 3 times more difficult to get on, and then I did less, but I stayed there until my heart rate went down, and I was saying, like, okay, I could do some more. Now I'll reward myself and we'll get off.
Gotcha.
The third thing I would say about that situation, and you can, as you're doing this, do things that stretch you a little bit. The third thing is it takes consistency. So, and not everyone has the same, same opportunity, but the more frequently you do this thing, the more you can expect things to resolve themselves. Okay. In the sense that, if you're, and I had this experience because it took years actually I remember it was about 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, I remember turning to my son saying, "Oh, I rode Rebel today and I didn't think about dying," And,
Yeah.
But over those years, I would ride consistently for a few months, and then he'd be off for a while, because I didn't have an arena. And, I had to wait for good weather, and he was ridden. I did it very inconsistently. So the more consistent you can be about it, the more you can build that sense of comfort. The other thing, though, in this case, because if part of what she's describing is what's called anticipatory anxiety. So
yes,
it's almost like the anxiety is not really about riding the horse. It's just thinking about and worrying about what could possibly happen down the road.
okay,
And there's a couple of things that can be helpful with anticipatory anxiety. The first thing that I would be thinking about is what if that whatever it was to happen again, are there things that she could do to prepare herself in ways that would keep her safer? So, if I know, for example, that if my horse had been one that was continually prone to spinning and taking off, then I would want to work on the things that I knew that would help me. I would want to, work on balance. I would want to work on my physical fitness. I would want to do things on horses that would challenge that, so that I felt that if he were to spin, that I'd have a better shot at staying on. All right, that's so that would just be something practical I would think of. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Again, so sometimes it's about us, and sometimes it really is about the horse. So if I knew more about the situation, I just responded. There's my virtualventingcoach.com. I do an Ask the Doc column for them, and one of the riders was was anxious about riding out on the trail because her horse freaked out, right? And part of what I said, and I would say it now, is I would want to check how much of this is about you and how much of it is about your horse. What's going on that your horse is engaging in this behavior that you're ending up on the ground. Okay. And
sure.
So potentially one of the things you might do is it might be a training issue, right?
Mm-hmm.
It might be a situation where my horse is unconfident in these particular situations, and he's at a point he or she's in a point of their development where maybe they need a more confident rider to help them, or maybe there's something that they can do in their training that could help the horse react differently in similar situations that would create a safer situation. So sometimes it's really just about one of the things I love is that friend Jake used to say, get that horse trained already, which to me was just brilliant, because I was always thinking about working on myself, right? And I said, I got to figure out how to train my horse.
Right.
And so there's that piece of it too. There are other strategies that are things that are helpful for coping with anxiety that'll help with anticipatory anxiety as well.
Okay.
The most prominent practice that is helpful is a mindfulness meditation practice.
Okay.
And that could be a whole, another conversation too. There's a number of things about mindfulness meditation that are directly applicable to our riding experience. But one of them in this case is that it teaches you to experience emotions without attaching to them or reacting to them. So it helps you develop the
easy for you to say.
Help you develop the capacity to feel anxious, but not have it affect your decisions, actions, or performance. So the anxiety comes into your experience, and you let it flow through, and you refocus your attention on what you need to be going on. And that is a profoundly helpful skill to develop with your writing. Yeah, and it helps you do that with feelings. It helps you do that with thoughts, because we have a lot of disruptive thoughts. And I imagine, I think it was Anne-Marie, probably has these intrusive thoughts about terrible things happening, which make her anxious, periodically while she's riding. And if she connects to those and she gets on that train and then starts feeling anxious, and that's going to affect, her muscle tone, and it's going to affect the way she applies her aids and what she's riding her horse, and can actually then work against her and supporting and perhaps developing the very kind of situation she hopes to avoid. So, that's another, really helpful kind of thing to be doing, is training yourself through that meditative practice.
Gotcha. Perfect. Okay, so Ray sends in a question. My daughter's a very solid, confident rider until a judge is in the ring. What can I do specifically to help her get over this?
So so the first question I would ask Ray is, does she want to get over it? So one of the greatest challenges and as a father, I know this, is that quite often we want things for our children that they either don't want for themselves, or they don't know that they want. So maybe they do want it, but they're not actively pursuing it. So because it's always going to be difficult when I want someone to change more than they do. So that's
okay. Sure.
Throwing that one out there as a general thing. I have no idea if that applies to Ray and his daughter or not. So let's assume that his daughter is really bothered by this experience and she really wants to change it. That's the kind of situation that the NLP strategies and hypnotherapy strategies we talked about earlier can be really, really helpful. Because what you would be working on is repatterning her association between having a judge in the ring and how she feels. Right? So, and that is one of those things which is about meaning making. That, there's something about, being judged that for her that has a significant meaning for her.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So that being said, in terms of strategies that he can help her develop for herself, couple of different things. I just talked about the mindfulness meditation stuff. The idea of being able to feel uncomfortable without reacting or responding to it, it just sort of mediates the impact of these uncomfortable feelings. And it's a great thing for kids, teenagers, even younger children to learn. So that's one thing that she can do with the expressed goal of getting better at tolerating those sort of negative feelings without it affecting her riding as much.
Okay.
The other thing that she can do, we talked about, connecting to resources and making them portable. So what I might do for her is to suggest her really sort of getting connected to feeling states and mindsets that really help her perform well, and practice kind of connecting to those and really experiencing those, and maybe connecting them to a word or a phrase. And then she can develop what I would call a reset button. Okay. So she gets into that ring, she finds herself having a less than desirable reaction because the judge is there, and then she can have that resource, fire off that resource. And I did that, I think, like we talked, I think that was the one that you posted in the 5-Bit Friday. Having an image.
Yes, the Mighty Mouse idea. Yes.
Right, the Mighty Mouse idea. There are also, it's a technique to use the powerful connection between our imagery and the reaction and response it has in our body And if she comes up with a really vivid image, which encompasses or encapsulates some really good stuff, she can use that also as a reset button in the ring, where she can kick off that image, kind of make her smile, and can help her in that account. It might help, just in terms of bigger picture stuff. This is a perfect opportunity for parents to have, conversations with their kids, not trying to solve the problem, but just to help them develop problem solving in language, to sit down with their kids and talk about what it means to them to be judged, and, what is competition for them, and, and what are their motivations in competition and goals, and what's the meaning of all of that for them, and, talk about, help them kind of sort through and develop a sense of perspective. And the only thing I would say to parents is, in those conversations, a lot more listening and a lot less teaching, because we always try to get our point across. And sometimes it's more helpful just to encourage them to be talking and thinking about it, rather than to be targeting a particular, thought outcome, wanting them to learn a particular lesson. So I would say all those things might be helpful for that.
Gotcha. Perfect. Lori asks, how do you get over the frustration and depression when you're unable to ride? She says, I know it's a huge topic, but maybe there's some tips. And so backstory for Lori is I know
Lori well.
Okay, yes, you know Lori. Yes.
Right.
So she's got, for our listeners that don't know Lori, she's got some injuries that are definitely preventing her from riding, and she's been dealing with these injuries for quite a while now. So how do you deal with that frustration and depression? I know even myself, I went through it. I've had both of my legs broken now, and the times that I was healing, the first time was pretty significant, the amount of time that I couldn't even get up off of the couch because of the severity of it, and gosh, about the only thing I could do was eat, and that wasn't very helpful either. So what kind of tips for that frustration or depression?
So, first, since, we both know Lori, I don't know that anything I say is going to be better than what she graciously lives every day.
Right.
So I really, in many ways, hold her out as a champion for other people who are suffering similar things. And some of the things I know that she does, for example, is spend time with her horse, in being present, and draw some positive energy from that. I think I saw a post the other day on Facebook where she was doing some crocheting or knitting,
yes,
with Albie in the barn and that sort of stuff. So, I think that, so you can say all the same sort of things about, practicing, not attaching to emotion and that sort of stuff. But at this level, this is a much deeper, more deeper. I'm trying to think of the right way to describe it. The grace that that needs to be mustered to deal with that frustration of that situation, is a very deep level kind of thing. And a lot of it, I think, ultimately is about, you find some level of peace by finding some sense of meaning in what it is that you can do. And I think it's kind of sort of on the level of man search for meaning. Lori brings a certain kind of light, and I don't know if she knows this, but I think this is true. I think people that know her would say this. Her connection and drive and the grace that she deals with her situation is an inspiration to all the people around her.
Absolutely.
In her commitment. And personally, I know that this may not mean anything to her, but personally, I think that that's an incredible gift that she gives to everybody that she knows. I think that those, when you face the challenge of that level in your life, that's really the place that you're looking to find. And again, I said it this way before. I'll say it again: is to do your best to find meaning in the things that you can't do. Mm-hmm. And I think she does that really, really well. Having people who understand that and can connect with her on that search and talk about things on that level. Not everybody feels comfortable talking about things on that level. Can be really helpful to people in similar situations, as they sort of noodle it through and can be honest about, the difficult thoughts and feelings that they have and the frustrations that they do have around it. Give them some freedom to do that. And, also that also can free up, the willingness. It helps people feel a little more emotionally safe, again, getting back to that idea, and then we can get a little more curious and creative about, what meanings we can make of this and what we can do that would make us feel good about this. So, and I feel at a loss because, that's just not an easy thing. So. Right.
Mm-hmm. And she does do an absolutely amazing job, like you said. It's nothing short of inspirational. Absolutely.
Right, and yet at the same time, I appreciate that doesn't, that she lives with that frustration every day. So.
Right. Mm-hmm. She sends a message saying that you're making her cry.
Well, it's these kinds of things. There are a couple situations in life I wish I really did have a magic wand.
Yes, right.
And this clearly is one of them.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, let's see. That's that's looking good there. All right, so I think we're definitely going to have to schedule at some point in the future here another broadcast, because I feel like there's so many things that we could dive even deeper into. But I want to be respectful of your time as well as everyone else's. And we're doing well with the 2.5 hour mark now here on this. So someone suggested to me the other day that maybe we should schedule intermissions every hour, kind of like I was reminded of the Gone with the Wind, halfway through the movie there was a screen that came up for a 5-minute intermission, but no, this is fantastic. Thank you so much. So so if you're keen on it, I've got some wrap-up questions here to close us out.
Fire away.
All right, perfect. So if there was one specific thing that you could recommend for riders to focus on, I'm going to adjust this question, as a primary means of improving their psychology in their horsemanship, what would that recommendation be?
It'd be two. Focus on the positive, what you want to do, and sign up for Headspace.
Headspace. That was, you mentioned that earlier. That's an app, correct?
Yeah. It's a mindfulness meditation app. I've tried a couple of them, and it's the one I think is best. And it's super, really, really good at what it does. So, mindfulness meditation. That would be the short answer to that. That really encompasses and helps you develop a whole number of skills that are really, really helpful.
Interesting. Very cool. I'm going to have to look for that. Probably not something I should be doing while I'm driving down the road, though, right?
No, but you can do amazing mindfulness meditations driving down the road, because mindfulness is a state of heightened awareness.
Okay.
And that's, for years, my whole meditation practice was driving back and forth to the office.
Interesting. Okay, perfect.
Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect. I'll be looking that up. That's the Headspace app for anybody who missed that. Okay. If you could ride with anyone, past or present, who would it be and why?
So present, and it's sort of, I'm actually working on this, would be to ride with Bertrand Revel. And I got a chance to watch him teach in the Leger instructor training course. Loved it, and I guess maybe, I don't even know if I want to ride with Philippe Carr. I mean, I guess I would, because that'd be so cool. But
Yeah.
I just think that I have a lot to learn from Bertrand, and I'm really captivated by the classical dressage and stuff that I've been working with here. So that would be that one. Can I throw in another one?
Sure, yeah.
And we don't have time to tell the story, but Captain Saunders, Captain Serenity Saunders, I'd like to throw his name out, because I don't know if anybody even knows him. He was on the Hungarian Atlantic team.
I was going to ask you about him, actually. You mentioned him in your introduction, that you went off to college instead of going to ride with him, correct?
Right, and the circumstances of my meeting him, it's a very funny story. So, I'd love to keep his name alive, and that's always I wonder what if kind of thing. I would love to just be able to magically go back and kind of live out that different life and to see where that ended, because really love that man, and he did amazing things for me. So yeah,
very cool.
Those two.
All right, perfect. What is your present personal definition of horsemanship?
So this gets back to the whole Dan Siegel stuff, and
okay.
So he talks about how we are, we are embodied, we have bodies, and we are relational. And he talks about us as a complex system, and that who we are is an emergent quality of that system. So what I've been thinking about lately is that, certainly I could draw boundaries around who I am as a person, and you could draw a boundary around, well, that's a horse is an equine. And I think that when you put the two together, it creates a whole other entity. So there's some emergent quality that organizes that interaction between me and my horse. And so my definition of horsemanship right now is exploring that relationship in a way that seeks wellness, in the way that we talked about it before: flexibility, adaptability, cohesiveness, energized and stable. So I know that's a really kind of way out there kind of answer, but that's where I'm at right now. That's what horsemanship is to me. It's about exploring, that which comes out of that relationship, and what ways can we make that healthy and well and dynamic and whatever that happens to be.
I love it. There's a lot of thinking into that. I love it. What book are you currently reading, or what was the last book you read? I told you, it's just random questions.
Yeah, that's fine. I know the book I'm currently reading is Interpersonal Neurobiology, and the one I just finished.
A little light reading there, right?
Yeah, and the one I just finished is Mind: The Journey to the Heart of Being Human.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay. Stealing a question from podcaster Tim Ferriss. If you had a giant billboard to print any message you wanted on for the whole world to see, what would the message be?
Wow. Probably be kind.
Nice. Good.
Because that applies to yourself, your horse, other people.
Yeah. That's everything. Be kind. I like it. How can folks find you?
They can find me lots of different ways. Facebook page, Riding Fire LLC. I have a personal page, Paul Haefner. I have a website, ridingfire.com. I have, and I just started a YouTube channel.
Yes, you did.
Yeah, my Riding Far LLC YouTube channel. Every week we have Sports Psych in a minute, but it's never a minute. It's kind of like this.
I was actually thinking that as I was watching this most recent one, thinking it's more like Sports Psych in 3 minutes and 45 seconds. But you know, that doesn't have quite the ring to it.
I know.
No, it's great though. It's great. I love those tips.
Yeah, so that's a place where, you know, right now I'm just sort of going through, we talked about a lot of things that you'll find on there. But as time goes on, it'll have reflections on things I've worked with people during a week and stuff like that. So my hope is over time, it'll be a resource for people. It'll help them, you know, find some thoughts and suggestions to things that they're thinking about. So you can find me there, and you can always call me. My phone numbers are in all those different places. So
perfect.
Happy to talk with people.
Awesome. Good. Good. Okay. So one of the things that I try to do with each of the broadcasts that I do personally and with guests is that I try to end or leave with a question of the day where we ask questions of the audience. I've been asking you questions all this time. The audience has been asking questions. Now, when we do this and I have a guest on, the guest gets to ask the question of the day. So I'm going to turn this over to you. You get to ask a question of our audience now. What would that question of the day be?
That question of the day would be the first question I always ask whenever I'm gathered with people. And that is, what is it in your horsemanship do you feel you do well?
Oh, that's a good question. I like that. I can't wait to see everybody's answers to that one. What is it in your horsemanship that you feel like you do well? Did I get that right?
Yep.
That's awesome. Perfect. Well, Paul, Dr. Haefner, this has been an absolute blast. Thank you so much for joining me for this.
Thank you. I really, really enjoyed it. It's an honor to be on, and really, really enjoyed. It's rare to cover so many topics.
Right.
So that's been really fun for me too.
Yes.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Good. Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Hang on just one moment and I'll close this out here.
Okay.
Gang, I want to thank you so much for tuning in for episode number 35 of Talking About Horses. I really appreciate you giving Paul and I your ear for this time. Please remember that if you've missed any of it, you can access the full broadcast through Facebook, YouTube, from iTunes, or by streaming directly from my website by accessing the Talking About Horses page from the Education drop-down menu. Through whatever platform you're listening, please be sure that you give us a rating, a comment, a review, and share with your friends. Your word of mouth and support is the fuel for this fire. Thanks so much, gang.